On today's Locked On Jayhawks, a disappointing finish to a disappointing season. Kansas smoked by Baylor. We recap KU's loss.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, Blue Sky Derek Johnson. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. You can find it anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're recapping KU losing to Baylor. They lose by 28 points. We break down what went wrong in the game, what went wrong in the season, as Kansas now falls a game short of bowl eligibility, and all the momentum that they built up comes to a screeching halt in this game as the defense couldn't stop anything that Baylor did. And certainly there will be some conversations about what needs to be done now in the offseason for KU. So let's start here. Kansas falls 45-17 in the end. A game where Kansas had 491 yards of offense. They had over 200 yards passing and over 200 yards rushing. They were balanced offense. They averaged almost 7 yards per carry. It wasn't the most efficient game in terms of completion rate or anything like that, but the passes they did complete, they averaged over 23 yards per completion. And you look at that and you would say, okay, well, maybe Kansas lost. The defense didn't play well, which obviously happened in this one. But to lose by 28 in a game like that happens, I don't think there's a better statistic that I can show in how bad the defense performed in this game than to say that the offense did those things and they still lost by 28. Now, obviously, the offense for KU didn't end up having a great game, so let's get into that as well. By the way, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, what I mean by the offense didn't have a great game overall, even though the yards were there, is that the situational plays, obviously you only put up 17 points in the end. So, it's not just on the defense. When you get blown out, it's going to be, a culmination of a lot of different things. And obviously this mostly probably is about the defense, but I think in the end, too many mistakes. And I think in the end, that becomes the theme of this season, does it not? Like, you had a chance to make bowl eligibility despite all your struggles, all your one-score losses. Well, didn't have to worry about a one-score loss in this one if you're Kansas. Not really in this game. And the theme of this season ends up being too many mistakes or plays on the small margin of error. And again, you lose this one by 28, so it's a little tougher to point to like one mistake that happened. But think about this, because in a game where your defense couldn't stop anything they were doing, your offense basically had to be perfect, and you weren't. You missed a field goal on the first drive. You had the overthrown interception later in the first half. You get held to a field goal on a goal-to-go situation. Then you have the big pass play to Tavita Noah, and the first notable thing that he has ever done in a KU uniform ends up being followed off with a fumble. And then you throw an interception in the end zone. You get stopped on 4th and 1, which, that absolutely sucks that's the final run play of Devin Neal's career. I will say, though, at the very least, I do want to give the offense a little bit of credit, a little bit of a hat tip that as much as that game was out of their favor and that it was pretty clear they were going to lose, the offense still kept trying to make plays, right? Maybe the execution wasn't there, but they were trying. There wasn't a quit level. It felt like the defense in this game, it felt like there was a level of quit in the second and third quarter. And maybe it was just a bad game. Maybe it was just a bad schematic matchup and bad this or that. But when you see them not gang tackling, a bunch of guys running to the ball, that didn't happen. Guys missing tackles, business decisions. It's hard to say that, I don't know, put it this way. The execution wasn't there for the offense when it needed to be in a game like this where your defense was struggling that much, but the effort was there, it felt like. The defense, I don't think effort or execution was there. And it was just it was accumulation. It was a giant math equation of everything that could have been a mess for KU. You gave up over 600 yards to Baylor, 293 on the ground on 6 yards per carry. You gave up 310 passing yards. At one point, their quarterback was 9 for 9 to open up the game. 195 of their 310 passing yards were after the catch. They had 4 touchdowns. You did not force any turnovers. You're -2 in the turnover battle. And yeah, again, you could go back and be like, well, there was those missed opportunities offensively where let's say you make the field goal on the first drive of the game. Okay, now it's 45-20 instead. Instead of the overthrown interception, what if you get, another field goal on that drive? It's not 45-23. Instead of getting held to a field goal, you get a touchdown on that one drive. Okay, now maybe it's 45-27. Maybe Tavita Noah doesn't fumble and you at least get a field goal there. It's 45-30. Maybe you don't have the interception in the end zone, you get a touchdown. Now it's 45-37. You don't have the stop on 4th and 1. Maybe you score a touchdown. All of a sudden, it's a tie game. Now, it doesn't work like that because you're going to still make some mistakes. Maybe you're not going to make all of those. But point being, it could have been at least a little bit closer if that happened. But on defense, it was everything. I mean, you get Marvin Grant toasted twice deep, which this was something going back to last year. Like, Craig Young was this super athletic linebacker safety hybrid. But the advantage of having Craig Young on the field was that he was a super athletic linebacker. And they had him playing as like a slot corner all the time to where he was getting targeted a lot, giving up a lot of catches. You lose that advantage you're going for. And I felt like all this season long, I felt like Marvin Grant would have been better off being like the third linebacker on the field. But a lot of times they ended up having to use him as like slot corner. And in some games, that's actually okay, right? If he's matched up on a linebacker or this or that, but you can't have him going up against a receiver who I think on college football, somebody DM'd me this, college football 25, I think Monterey Baldwin has a 98 speed. Why are you matching that? Again, it's not great for Marvin Grant that he gave up those touchdowns, but I almost view that more as like malpractice from why as a coaching staff are you having him line up? Shouldn't you have Marvin Grant guarding somebody else? And if you're like, oh, but they spread us out and we didn't have a matchup for him on the field. Okay, then play nickel. Play dime, put an extra corner out there and put Marvin Grant in as one of the linebackers instead of Cornell Wheeler or J.B. Brown or Tywan Berryhill or something like that, where you play a little bit smaller. And yes, you could say, well, how would you do stopping the run? Guess what? They didn't stop the run in their base defense anyway. So what would it have mattered? I don't know. But there was 0 pass rush in this game for KU. KU only got 3 tackles for loss. They ended up with 3 sacks, ironically enough, but I don't know. It felt like on the key plays, like there was just nothing there. Baylor, for the most part, just avoided throwing at the corners. I don't really blame the corners in Kobe and Mello Dotson. I know Mello gave up that 1 touchdown on the in route, but for the most part, everything was over the middle. It was against the linebackers. It was against the safeties. And I thought this was a really bad game for the linebackers. I mean, KU missed 1 billion tackles. A lot. It was everybody was missing tackles, but a lot of those were the linebackers. And we mentioned Baylor likes to run it up the middle. They did. And KU couldn't stop it because they couldn't make tackles, right? And the defensive line didn't get great surge. So that's going to make it harder on the linebackers, but they were getting beat in coverage. They were getting beat, unable to make tackles. And in a season where there has been some lowlights for the linebacking core, they've had some more highlights, I think, this year than a lot of years past, because I thought J.B. Brown, for the most part, the season was a solid player for KU. Same for Cornell Wheeler when he was not, having to play injured or anything like that. But there's been some lowlights even then for the linebackers, whether it's one of the guys off the bench or whoever. There's been a lot of lowlights for the KU linebacking core in the entire Lance Leipold era, and this was one of the worst linebacker games I can remember. There was that Duke game, I think was that Lance Leipold's first year at the helm of KU that they lost and kind of a shootout in Duke, and that was one that I remember being very bad with the linebackers. This was certainly up there. I also thought the scheme was really bad. It was basically very simple for Baylor. They were we're either going to hand off up the middle or we're going to throw a screen to the outside. And it's basically wherever we have numbers, we're going to go with that. And it felt like KU was just playing zone every single time. And this is something I've got on it before, that you have these 2 corners who are probably going to be playing in the pros next year. Play more man-to-man. And when you're going up against, if you're playing man-to-man, that's going to basically take away the screen as long as your guys are fighting and winning off the blocks. And it was just an inability to adjust. There was a lack of adjustments. I didn't like the scheme to begin with. And I think Brian Borland just never really figured out how to guard tempo. That's been something that KU certainly struggled with in his entire time at KU. And I think, to me, the difference in play calling was apparent in this one. Jeff Grimes, I thought, had an overall fine game. There were certainly some moments, there were a couple first half drives where it was 2nd and long and they kept throwing behind the sticks, or they kept running on first down when Baylor was basically saying, hey, we're going to go all out on the run. But I thought Dave Aranda, who was calling plays, the head coach to call the defense for Baylor, outperformed Jeff Grimes, an offense coordinator. And that was something we talked about in the preview. Would Jeff Grimes know more about the tendencies of Dave Aranda, or would Dave Aranda know more about the tendencies of Jeff Grimes? It felt like Dave Aranda knew more about the tendencies of Jeff Grimes. There were several plays in the game where I noticed a safety or a linebacker or a DB point something out or creep up exactly where the play was going. So they knew what he wanted to do, and it became too predictable, right? I thought overall, though, again, if you go back to some of the mistakes they made, the offense would have actually had a good output. So even though some of that stuff happened, I think that stuff might be picking nits a little bit more, but still, I would have given the advantage to Aranda over Grimes. And based on what we kind of saw overall, it was more so that, I mean, that was just a big advantage for Baylor. They let go of Jeff Grimes in the offseason. They get Jake Spavital, and that was a huge advantage for them. Spavital over Brian Borland in this matchup. So it just sucks because at least if this was a close loss, obviously people would be heartbroken with how the season ended and they came so close if there was a close loss, and it'd be that heartbreaking way and it'd be sad. But I think it would be a little bit easier to give salutes to the seniors, for people to be like, man, but thank you to Devin Neal and Kobe Bryant and all these guys like that. And I'm not saying that stuff's not going to happen or it doesn't deserve to happen, because it does. But I think right now everybody's PO'd, and deservedly so, about kind of the final effort here in this game. Because I think at one point in the second half, it felt like if Kansas came into this game 3-8 or 4-7, where it's like, what are they playing for? And you had that type of performance, you would sit here and be like, okay, I can understand how that would have happened. They were playing for a bowl game, and I don't know. It's just very weird how that would have happened. And obviously, I will say, great job by Kansas. I do want to finish on kind of a positive note. Great job by the team, by the players, by the coaching staff to keep this team together on the big picture for the season when they were 2-6. To even finish, if you would have said when they were 2-6 they're going to finish 5-7 with 3 ranked wins, I don't know that you would have been super ecstatic about it, but you would have been like, well, at least they finished the season strong. You know what I mean? Because at one point when you're sitting at 2-6, you were looking down the barrel and going, could it be 2-10 with the way this season finishes? And they do deserve some credit for that. They do deserve some credit for being the first team in program history to win 2 straight ranked games, to win 3 straight ranked games, for creating some fun memories those Saturdays, for keeping you entertained all season long, for having a great senior day and some of the home performances. And I think a great job as well that they deserve credit for not bottoming out. That matters in recruiting. That matters from entertainment perspective. That matters for building the next team. That the jumping point isn't going to be jumping off a 2-10 season, right? That stuff matters, and credit to them for that. And credit to some of the careers of the players, right? Obviously this wasn't the final way you wanted it for Devin Neal and Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson and whoever, but overall, all of those players, and I'm skipping over many others, their careers were still great at Kansas. They still went to back-to-back bowl games from where this program was. All that stuff deserves a tip of the cap. But also, this was yet another missed opportunity in a season marred by exactly that. And certainly I guess a very Kansas football thing. Get everybody's hopes up. They got everybody's hopes up in the offseason, and then it dipped down. Then they get everybody's hopes up coming in this week. And unfortunately, Kansas football things happen, as KU has still never won in Waco. And the average defeat is around 30 points in their last 8 games in Waco. All right, let's continue on. Go to the game. Good, bad, all that stuff. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode is brought to you by Game Time, where they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And, they have their lowest price guarantee, which means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if not. And they've all-in pricing where you can toggle that feature. You show the total up front. No surprise fees at checkout. That's pretty fun, isn't it? Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Kansas Falls 45-17. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We will have a KU basketball recap up for you, whether it's Sunday morning or late Saturday night as well. Okay, what are our good and bad goats of the game? Well, let's start with the good, go out on top. Devin Neal gets a good goat here. 20 carries in the end, 133 yards, a touchdown, 6.7 yards per carry. Also had a catch for 5 yards. And that catch for 5 yards could have easily been a loss of 2 yards. Those are plays that I'll never forget his time at KU. The ability to turn plays that should have been 0-yard gains, -2-yard gains, into +3, +4, +5 that kept you on schedule. unbelievable season, unbelievable career. And obviously it didn't end the way you wanted to. You get stopped on the 4th and 1. You had that drop on the last drive as well. So that absolutely sucks, but I'm not going to remember Devin Neal for that stuff. I'll remember him for all the great moments he provided over his course of his career with KU. I still think he deserves a statue. He's the all-time leader in career rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. He today, by having over 100 rushing yards, had his 8th 100-plus yard rushing game in a season, which ties him for the record all-time at KU. He also had another, until today, I guess it makes it a top 6 season, but coming into the year, top 5 season in terms of most of those with last year. So unbelievable for a career, and a good game still to go out for Devin Neal, even with Baylor kind of keen on the run, especially as the game went on. I thought the receivers did a good job for Kansas in this game. I know none of them had more than 3 catches. Like Quentin Skinner, 3 for 77. Luke Grimm, 3 for 73. LJ Arnold had 1 for 22. I thought the collective of them, like, they made some nice catches, especially on some big plays for Kansas overall. I thought Jared Casey gets a good go here too. 2 catches for 57 yards. He had some nice yard after catch on those, and that'll be another guy certainly to be missed here around Kansas. He also had some key blocks. There were some nice plays on some big Devin Neal runs, especially early in the game where Casey was providing a pivotal block as a part of kind of all of that. I guess I'm trying to think, like, off the top of my head. So let's see. Baylor had 4 TFLs. They had 0 sacks. Kansas had 491 on offense. Off the top of my head, I thought the offensive line did a pretty good job. Now, maybe there was a couple plays, like there was one pointed out where they shifted the wrong way, and maybe you gave up a few pressures like here or there. Like, I doubt it was a perfect game for the KU offensive line, but I thought overall they played good enough to win. And Calvin Clements obviously got the start in this one with Logan Brown out, and I thought he acquitted himself, just well. Like, you watch the Chiefs game on Friday, and it's very noticeable the struggles of their left tackle. That was not noticeable at all in this game. So that's a good sign, because certainly you'd expect Calvin Clements to be a starter next year. Bryce Cabeldue will depart. We'll see what happens with Logan Brown. He can come back for another year. Does he go to the NFL early? What does he decide to do? But if he's back or he's not, either way, there is another tackle spot open, and you figure Calvin Clements has the head start on that race. And so that was I think, good boosting point for him to finish out this regular season. What about the bad goats of this one? I didn't give any good goats to anybody on defense. Now, maybe that's not fair, because maybe there were some players that, like DJ Withers had 5 tackles and a sack. And I thought he looked pretty good, but also it felt like consistently the KU defensive line was getting blown off the ball. How much of that was Withers? How much of that was other guy? Maybe Withers deserves a good goat. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe even, like, I don't know, the corners deserve a good goat for KU, because it felt like all of the passes for Baylor were over the middle of the field, were targeting linebackers and safeties. So, like, maybe they actually did their job. I don't know. But as far as the bad goats here, I'm going to say tackling, just in general. Like, I mean, I'll be interested to see what the missed tackle numbers are on Pro Football Focus afterwards, because that was bad. KU picked, I would imagine that's going to be their worst tackling game of the season, and KU picked a bad time to do it against an explosive Baylor offense. And when you look at bad matchups for KU, teams that run tempo and teams that have speed all over the field, TCU, Baylor, I mean, ironically, Colorado didn't give them as much trouble, so I don't know why that one was different, but yeah, that certainly was a problem for KU. Pass defense, I guess overall, run defense, everything was kind of a bad goat there. I guess short field offense, right? Once you got like inside their 30-yard line, you missed a lot of opportunities to score some more points. That wasn't great. I would also say the special teams was not good for KU in this one. You missed the short field goal in the early going. You also kept, like, all season long trying to return kickoffs, and you'd stop like inside your own 15, inside your own 20. Now, the first one of the game, you did that, got stopped at like the 14. You got bailed out because they had like a roughing or I don't know, unnecessary roughness call on the first play of the game, stuff like that. And then I don't know, I guess schematically, it'll be interesting to see what KU does with Brian Borland, because I believe his contract is up at the end of the season. Does he just retire? And I thought overall Brian Borland showed some growth this year over the course of the season. He had some games where he adjusted a little bit more. He threw some blitzes out there, and it was a little bit better. And KU's defense, I think, overall has been on an arrow pointed up every year in the Leipold era. Maybe last year to this year, it's kind of plateaued a little bit more. It still hasn't been good enough, and I certainly have some critiques of it. I don't think it's been, today it was an abject disaster. I don't think this full season it certainly was that. So this certainly leaves a bad taste in your mouth that'll probably make you feel like it was worse than it actually was. But I think it probably would behoove both parties, whether he wants to retire or go to a different job, whatever, for Kansas to look somewhere else and get kind of a fresh perspective in there, to say the least. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens there. All right, what is next? The offseason, plenty more. We'll talk about that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. Obviously not the conversation we were hoping to have after the KU football game. Now, you might be wondering, okay, they're 5-7. Like, do they have a chance at making a bowl game with APR scores? Well, they have the 73rd nationally APR scores and 11th in the Big 12. So it would, I guess it's not impossible, because not every team who is ahead of you in APR score is going to be 5-7. Some of them might be 4-8 or worse. Others are already going to be 6-6 or better. So maybe there's a chance you work yourself to, like, of the available 5-7 teams, 4th or 5th, and then the top 3 teams in front of you, like maybe 2 get in who are 5-7, and a couple of them are just like, no, we don't want to play in the bowl game. We have a new head coach, or like the players are going to opt out or whatever. And maybe you luck into it. I don't know. But also based on the effort you saw, or the lack thereof in that game, do you want it? I don't know. Probably you do, because the practices would obviously be worth a ton for a Kansas team that's going to be losing a bunch after this season. So that's what's next for KU, is the offseason. More specifically, conversations with players and coaches that you want to try to retain and try to get them to stick around, or you want to move on. And then interviews with other coaches, or hitting the transfer portal hard, hitting scouting hard, whatever it might be, to figure that stuff out. Now, when you look at the KU football roster for next year, it seems like Daniel Highshaw isn't going to be a part of the team. So, could they go out there and get a running back? But right now, you're way too early, like starting lineup projection for KU on offense could be like, Jalon Daniels at quarterback, running back is like Savion Morrison, Harry Stewart, Johnny Thompson, receiver, maybe it's like Doug Emelian, and then Jaden Nickens, Keaton Kubeka, I don't know, like some of these other freshmen coming in, probably some transfer portal pickups there. Tight end, you're looking at like, will Deshaun Hanukkah come back? Leighton Cure. Offensive line could be actually pretty good if Logan Brown comes back for another year, because you'd have him, Calvin Clements. I think Kobe Baines, Bryce Foster, and Nolan Gorchika have another year, and then you still have guys like Amir Herring who are kind of developing. You brought in some freshmen, or will be bringing in some freshmen to build out some depth on the defensive side of the ball. So, I mean, offensively, you'd be looking at, well, does Jalon come back? That is a big conversation. I threw him in with the starters. He can, but that's not a guarantee that he does, right? Does Kansas pony up enough NIL? Does he want to transfer somewhere else with the way that he finished out the season? Then again, with the 2 interceptions, does that damper it a bit going back to where it was at the beginning of the year? I don't know what's going to happen there. If it's not him, is it Isaiah Marshall? Is it David McCollum? Whoever. But offensively right now, you look at it, and there's a chance, like, if Jalon does end up leaving, if Logan Brown does end up leaving, you have 2 returning starters on next year's team. Now, if both of them come back, you could have 4. And if you count Calvin Clements, that'd be 5, right? And you can add with the transfer portal, but that has to be a little bit scary. Defensive side of the ball, Dean Miller can come back for another year. I think another year in the offseason. I think he showed enough flashes this year that'll be good for him to come back. You have all those young defensive ends, Deshaun Warner, By Job, Dylan Brooks, who was injured, Dak Brinkley, that you expect that unit to actually take a big leap next year. Defensive tackle is going to bring a lot back. Withers, Dunn, Taylor. Again, you never know who transfers at this point in time. But you look at the linebacker core, you already got an early start with Bengali Kamara. You got to do more, because there's going to be a lot more departures there. Corner, you feel probably good about where Jalen Todd's going to be next year. Jameel Croft. Demarius McGee kind of lost favor, so we'll see what happens there. You do have some safeties who rotated in, like Taylor Davis, so that'll be interesting. But, again, you look at the defense side of the ball, and it's like the only returning starters you might have might be on the defensive line. So, I guess it depends, like, is Jason Gilliam a starter or whatever? There's going to be a lot of open playing time, point blank, for KU to go after people in the transfer portal, and how well you do there. We've seen teams, hit rich in the transfer portal in a given offseason, and they have a 10-win season. We've seen other teams strike out on a hard, like look at Florida State this year, and then a horrible year. So it is a bit of roulette in a certain way, but now you're just trying to figure out who you want back, who you're going after, figuring out your NIL stuff, figuring out the stadium funding, National Signing Day, hitting the portal hard, getting ready for a very important spring ball. Again, at least even though this will leave a sour taste in your mouth to finish the season, good on the seniors for at least not bottoming out here, that you get those big ranked wins at the end, that a down season for Lance Leipold is still better than any of the previous seasons going back to Mark Mangino, and that at the very least, maybe you built up enough positive momentum in the 3 previous wins that you can keep all those things moving forward, that you can keep donations coming in, you can keep NIL and the stadium funding going, and have a better jumping off point to try to get back to a bowl game next season. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back for a recap of the KU Furman basketball game. Hopefully a little bit better result for the Jayhawks. We'll talk about that then, right here on LOJ. See ya.